My name is Rusty Myers.
I am Nathan Felton.
I am Brandon Penglase.
And we are going to talk about DeployStudio for at least an hour. We can talk about it for an hour. Whether it makes sense, you can decide on the feedback form. So I started using DeployStudio a few years ago in the College of Education in my previous job. We used DeployStudio to image new machines as they came in. We often had faculty machines being purchased once or twice every month. So what I decided to do was use packages and scripts within DeployStudio to image those machines and get them set up for faculty. You want to tell a little about
I originally started out using a Firewire drive to image Macs one by one. And at the time, it made sense because we only had, 40 Macs or so in one of my computer labs. So 2 years ago, I actually had a co-op who found DeployStudio. And initially, it was a small project for my 6-month co-op to set it up. Excuse me. So initially, that's how it started out, was just basic imaging. We did a golden master image and pushed it out to the lab and used that image for the whole year. Now it's since evolved. We've pushed it out for, you gotta get the frog out of my throat. We've since pushed it out so that we can re-image faculty machines. I'm actually currently looking at Rusty's backup restore script so that we can do user state migration type stuff on the Apple side of things. But now it's much more evolved. We use instant image for a base image, and then we push out packages and updates and scripts to set up certain settings and stuff like that specific to RIT.
For myself, we started using actually, let me begin with that. When I first started the position, the guy before me had a basic Netboot setup. He was using just a standard created with SUI, SIU, whatever the terminology is, just base image with net restore on it, and was using that, and it worked fairly well. I mean, it was at least better than running around with Firewire drives. But I wanted to improve it. I heard about a couple different projects, started looking into the DeployStudio, and 3 years running now, we've had DeployStudio deployed and been using it for different labs. Haven't gone to the thin imaging route yet, still using the golden master route. At least that's kind of what we've done and the way our managers wanted things. So, but yeah, got DeployStudio set up. I kind of live on the nightly build side. I'm one of those crazy guys who like to test stuff. I've had it break on me. Luckily, not too bad, but so.
Cool. So I'd like to hear about your guys' DeployStudio infrastructures. Who's using it right now? Wow. Awesome. That's a lot of people. Was that everyone?
So what are you doing here then?
I think that was everyone.
Maybe one or two did.
Okay. So great. We've got a lot of DeployStudio knowledge here. So our thoughts were to discuss some of the latest issues that DeployStudio is having, discuss some of the specific issues that you're having, and then using this large room of brains, try and answer those questions. So one of the things that we've been seeing on the forums, and I think we see this with every version of DeployStudio that's released, is the Netboot set no longer boots the previous, or a machine. Create a new Netboot set and it doesn't boot a machine. Right? Or, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. You do create a new Netboot set and it boots a new machine. You don't create a new Netboot set after deploying an upgrade to DeployStudio and it doesn't boot. Did I say that correctly?
I believe so.
Close enough?
Sound good.
Okay. Did anyone understand that?
Basically, you get a new machine, you don't recreate your Netboot, it's not going to work. But if you recreate it, it will work.
And why? Drivers? The kernel extensions, the latest stuff that you need for the new hardware, that's one thing. The other thing is your DeployStudio set, your server, has to be the same version as your runtime, what you're netbooting. So
DeployStudio
there's two
version,
things.
not OS version.
And DeployStudio has said in their release notes that they'll upgrade your Netboot sets when you install. How many people has that actually worked for? One? Half? Can I say half there? Two halves. So let's say two halves. One person out of this room, it's worked for.
There is a little disclaimer in there that says only if compatible. So there's like a little hook or something that they check for, that if the version is close enough, it'll upgrade, but otherwise it won't. But it doesn't tell you either way.
So every time I upgrade my DeployStudio server, the next thing I do is I create 2 Netboot sets. I create one on the very latest piece of hardware that I can find, and I create one on a piece of hardware that's a few years older. And the reason I do this is because those white MacBooks, those Core 2 Duo white MacBooks that came out in 2007, they won't boot for me from a Netboot set that I've created on an i7. Does anyone else experience that? No? Hopefully it's just me. Question?
I do something a little similar.
Okay.
I've got a 10.6.8 and a 10.7.3 boot set because I figure anything that can't boot 10.7,
Yes.
I can boot with 10.6.8.
Yeah. So when I go home, I'm going to have 2 Netboot sets. One's going to be 10.7, and the other one's going to be 10.6. That's a better idea than mine. I like that.
Shouldn't support, I guess, based on like whatever is removed by the combo updates though. So why do you have to rely on like that white MacBook as opposed to the latest combo update that supports the latest hardware?
Answer?
So what is it actually doing when it creates the Netboot set? What command is it actually running? Ditto. So whatever box is booted, that's what you're getting when it comes to the system and library folders. It's just enough of a kernel to boot a machine. That's why i7, which might be different because of an architecture difference, will not possibly boot white plastic MacBooks. I can't confirm that. Thank goodness. No white plastic MacBooks.
It's not a Core 2, it's like an old, the first one.
The Core Duos, yeah.
Those are the ones that will boot out.
Yeah, those will not boot line, yeah.
But like, it's really dependent upon the booted system that's creating the Netboot set. Like,
Yeah.
There's nothing more critical. It's not doing any magic about like, hey, the optimal machine I'm booting will contain this system folder. It's looking directly at the system folder, dittoing it.
Yep.
One of the ways we use the
I'm supposed to be walking around with that, actually.
one of the ways my environment uses the DeployStudio runtime is actually in a fully functional netboot environment, which is our maintenance netboot environment with disk warrior, etc. So one of the ways you can get around some of the difficulties while also kind of simplifying the service desk level of your organization would be to throw the runtime into a fully functional netboot environment.
Yeah, you can pretty much create your own netboot too. If you go and use the Apple's utility, you can create your own and then basically throw anything you want in it. All you have to do at that point is throw the admin tool in, and then inside of that, it's got the runtime and all that other kind of fun functionality.
I'm loud enough.
All right, fair enough.
It's just kind of smaller.
Is anyone here familiar, and maybe you or Alistair, somebody can feel this, with how DeployStudio processes its binder replacement at boot in the Netboot set? When I've made custom boot sets that replace the binder with another environment, I haven't done it the same way they have, and I was trying to reverse engineer it last week. I couldn't figure it out. Does anybody know what
So,
they're doing? Just to swap out the binder and boot directly into the runtime? I was trying to modify a utility on my net.
You know, I remember seeing this, but I don't recall what it is off the top of my head.
I couldn't find it.
are they dropping the login window?
Apple used to have a document, a PDF, for, it was a while back. It was when, I'll show my age maybe. 10.4, 10.5, they had a way, it actually documented about how to replace the Finder and boot up, and it might have been a slash
Login window
/etc
list is normal.
file.
At least that's the way I've done it.
Did you look at /etc.boot?
No.
/ncrc.cd-rom, I mean, those are the old files, they're not done that way anymore, but
They must be calling it out of RC, because there's no login window plist, the login window binder is not even
yeah.
in there.
I'd look at /etc scripts and take a look at those and see. That might be how they're doing it.
It was very backwoods. I was stuck in a location with a whole bunch of machines that needed to send and pass before we could recycle them and had no network access and one Netboot set. It was all MacGyver. It was
Sometimes that's the best innovation.
I mean, I love MacGyver. That's
all these
awesome.
machines now, and
Yeah.
gigabit switch in the truck, because I'm just that guy.
If it's any help, I actually have a Fluke cable tester in my backpack right now.
The other
Higher ed, shut up.
Actually, it's for personal.
the other half.
It's a cheapy low end.
He's prepared.
Just saying, I think all of us have our own little like utilities and tools and all that kind of stuff that we always carry around. Everybody's like, why do you have that? Just for those situations.
Yeah.
There's another hack you could do too. When reverse engineering systems like that, you could do that. You take all night. You could do an ND find. Spotlight has an run it as root and look and search for their executable, the binary, and see where it finds it on the system. But that doesn't always work because it might deploy some parts of the disk. Then you can do a recursive grep as root, and then search the entire file system. It'll take a while, but you get it overnight. And you can see what the references are to the binary DeployStudio, and then reverse engineer from there.
You guys will all be happy to hear what I actually ended up doing.
Yeah.
I had a Milwaukee lithium-ion hammer drill in my trunk and a 3/8" 12-inch long bit, and I had 47 Emacs. It was great just to watch them pop. Just go right out the trunk and never come back.
So, does anybody else have any experiences from Netboot that they'd like to ask questions about or talk about? Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I was trying to figure out with the new MacBook Airs, even though in our current environment we're running 10.68 for the runtime for the Netboot, and all the other machines, all the other iMacs, everything can boot. When I created a new MBI file and I copied it over, I couldn't even boot the older machines, let alone.
1073. That's what I see.
Is it the original MacBook Airs? Because they're Core Duos. So I don't think they'll run line. I think.
No, it's
Maybe
the
correct.
new ones.
Okay,
Oh, it's
okay.
the new
The
ones.
new ones, yeah.
I thought you said it was the original, sorry.
Talking 10.68 or 10.73 kernel? I didn't know.
Well, follow up to that, I've had where even on like a say, 2008 Mac Pro that I had 10.68 on, I couldn't boot to the 10.7 NBI, DeployStudio NBI. I had to write well, I don't have a fully functional netboot thing. I have to send out the ARD commands to do stuff. But I basically just had a little script. I'd have a 10.68 NBI image and a 10.7.3, and I just boot the one that doesn't boot to 10.7.3. I just boot to 10.68 NBI. So I just have the two up there, and it will switch between. That's the only way I figured out around it. It will image you can put a 10.7.3 image on, and then it seems fine. But I ran into that. That was a little.
So that's kind of what Rich was saying, keeping a 10.7.3 and a 10.6.8 netboot side by side. Now, Rich, if you set 10.7.3 as the default and the machine can't boot to it, will it try the next netboot set?
And here I actually have the 10.6.8 set as the default. Because my machines that can boot 10.7.3, the machines that actually really want to have 10.7.3, if you hold down.
There's some feedback.
Oh, thank you.
In my environment, I have it set to netboot across subnets. So the machines that I probably most want to run 10.7.3 on, if you hold down the Option key at boot up, in addition to your internal hard drives, if you have netboots across subnet properly set up, you'll also see the list of all your netboot drives. So what I've told my guys is that if you have a machine you want to do, that you want to set up with 10.7.3, hold down the Option key. Select the netboot set that's called 10.7 DeployStudio. Otherwise, hold down the N key. It'll automatically boot to that 10.6.8 environment. So my older machines that I don't have that Option button trick, they'll just go to 10.6.8 and they'll be happy.
Yeah, I think it's the aluminum machines that started listing the netboots.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. So that help?
Yeah, because first of all, I already hate the Mac. I already hate the MacBook Airs because they don't have FireWire drives. They don't have Ethernet, and the users who buy these machines never think to buy the USB Ethernet dongle. So what am I supposed to do with it?
Or the video adapter, or the Apple Care.
Right, so all the other machines boot. So my issue is that I was recently put in this situation because the other MacAdmin, he just quit abruptly.
Well, he's probably sick of dealing with it, right?
just quit abruptly, and I'm like, okay, all the other machines work. Do I risk trying to upgrade DeployStudio and possibly breaking that? Or I was actually thinking, well, maybe since there's an option in DeployStudio, maybe just for the MacBook Airs, since there's just a few of them, that I would use just a FireWire drive or something like that. But I like his suggestion of creating the 10.73 and then using the Option key and see, because it was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, it was one thing, I was like, okay, I have the new Netboot set, it should work.
Yeah.
Nothing was booting. So it was driving me crazy.
One thing I want to note about that real quick is with the recent release of RC131 Bravo, They did make all the changes to how you identify the MacBook Airs, specifically because of the MacBook Airs, or not just the MacBook Airs, but all the computers. And while I personally don't image MacBook Airs, we keep 2 of the Ethernet dongles in our office so that we can image them when they come in. And like I said, with the RC131, they made it easier so that computers don't get confused with the shared MAC address on that dongle. So now they're identified by their serial number, I believe.
Yep.
So.
I was just going to say, my experience is that the MacBook Airs and the Minis share a lot in common as far as hardware goes, and they're a little different than the MacBook Pros and the iMacs. I've always had trouble trying to use a standard image on those unless I get a good reference image using a combo updater. So what the issue was for us is that the latest round of MacBook Airs, and this, I think this carries back through previous generations, the MacBook Airs and the Minis had different hardware as far as the motherboard goes. So you can create an image just for those 2 that they will share if you want to. But the other thing I did was, again, you grab the newest piece of hardware you can find, and when you update, use the combo updater. Go ahead and download it to make sure you get the right one, and that should give you a full-fledged, fairly universal image to do your Netboot image from. Because if you just try and snapshot an old version of the OS on one of those unique machines, it's not going to work on anything else. And if you try and take a reference shot from like a straight iMac with the iMac system updater, it's not going to work on those machines. So, and then with the latest round of the MacBook Airs, they did stuff to firmware that I think they're now replicating with the other laptops. So we're actually at a point where we have 2 images to boot from, 2 Netboot images to boot from if need be. But I also use the 10.6.8, 10.7 thing. If I've got really old hardware, it's a fail-safe. So if you're going to make a reference image to make a Netboot image, make sure you're using a combo updater and make sure that it's the most clean generic image you've got possible, and it's not particular to one of those machines. And it should work. I'm netbooting MacBook Airs over the dongle. We keep some spares in the office, 1 per person on a bench. That's a registered NIC, and we just plug it in and it goes. And I have a white polycarbonate sitting in front of me, and I just imaged this off a 10.7.3 Netboot image, ran fine.
That polycarbonate's newer
This
than
is
the
the unibody.
polycarbonates I've tested that have
Right.
not worked with 10.7 without rebuilding the 10.7.3. Let me rephrase that. They both worked with 10.7.3 Netboots, the old polycarbonate, the 2007 MacBooks, and the new aluminum MacBooks. They could both boot to 10.7.3, but not from the same Netboot. So I didn't have a clean image, though. I was just messing around at home, so that might just be why.
This is the unibody, it's one of the later, but I know for a fact that the straight-up polycarbonates you boot off the generic image that I have.
Cool. Great.
You just need a clean reference image because the hardware changes.
Yeah, clean reference image, and definitely, like you said, the combo updaters. Use the combo updaters, not deltas, combos. Right?
Oh, yeah, I was just wanting to reiterate what he was saying. We do a similar thing at our university with the various operating system Netboots, and the hardware issues, not just to DeployStudio. We've had that as well, and we also, in fact, we've done it since 10.5, back when we were still netbooting PowerPCs as well as Intels off the same universal netboot, and have just kept that in for older equipment. We have a 10.6 and a 10.7, depending on the hardware and what you need, and then we have runtimes running within that for software setups. But we also use our netboot for diagnostic tools as well, Tech Tool Pro, Disk Warrior, whatever, all built into that, so it can be used by all our techs across campus. And kind of the same trick, if it's new enough, they can use the option key to boot in and select it. If you have a working OS, you can also go through the control panel and see the list. But we're currently running, I want to say 12 various netboots, depending on the scenario of what you get into. It gets a little tangled as far as which one you need to use, but with a little training, everything from OS installs, we're doing that over net install, which is a lot faster than the disks, and we're running at least 3 OS versions of those. We're running 3 for diagnostics, and we also have the ASD, Apple System Diagnostics set as Netboots, so that you can actually run those without having to burn all the disks as well, and they don't have to bring stuff to our hardware repair area. It puts the local admins more in charge of being able to diagnose hardware issues first, and they just pick whichever variant netboot they want from that. But yeah, hardware is the biggest issue with that, and the easiest thing is try to gauge what OS came with the machine and use that or newer, and until you find one that boots it.
Those hardware disks that you're netbooting from, I think in Netboot you can lock those down by machine model.
You can, but I've had tangled results from that.
So ignore
It sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Luckily, we don't have too many Mac Minis and Airs to deal with, so we just kind of put them on the floor and kick them when people bring them in.
Hockey.
But again, you can do it through Ethernet dongles and things like that.
Cool. Nice.
Actually, a point I want to make about the being able, man, this frog doesn't want to go away today. About being able to select which models you can boot from. Has anyone else noticed that when you create a fresh Netboot set using DeployStudio, that option isn't there? They like forget to copy in the plist, I think it is, that allows you to restrict what Netboot sets can be used to which model? Does anyone know?
There.
Yeah. Okay.
I never looked into why that was, but
Yes.
I just assumed that whatever class of network store image they were making it as just wasn't compatible with that option.
Okay.
I didn't know how Apple would do that, but I never actually looked in if it is just a question of.
I've done a little bit of research into it, and from what I remember, because this is a while ago now, is basically it's a simple plist within the Netboot image. And I think it's just a matter of the scripts that they use to create the Netboot image doesn't copy them over. Because when you use Apple ASR or whatever the utility is to create an Apple Netboot set, it's there because I've done both for testing purposes before. I just wanted to see if I was the only one that wasn't showing up for. Does anyone actually use the restrict based on model number for any Netboot sets or anything? No?
I would if I could for DeployStudio because that's actually, I do a similar thing to what Rich was suggesting, except I do it the opposite. My 10.7.3 is my default.
10.6.8.
I have a 10.6 fallback for a cord through a machine that might show up.
Okay.
But then it's a question of having to go and fiddle sometimes with the defaults or.
All right. I'm going to take a look into it some more to see if there's a workaround for us to be able to get it to work with DeployStudio, because I can think of a couple instances where it'd be helpful to enable restriction based on model number. And I noticed you raised your hand that you're doing it. Are you using it with a DeployStudio Netboot set, or is it another Netboot set?
Well, we're using it with a DeployStudio Netboot set, and you're contagious. The DeployStudio Netboot set, and a couple of our schools are self-servicing, so we're doing the hardware diagnostic gateway because warranty work's gotten really nasty. They want to see results from those hardware tests. They don't just take my word for it that boards are bad. And
You're doing ASP?
yeah.
Yeah, so we run
I found that
in
too.
parallel while already internal Netboot Diagnostics on its own little network just to satisfy Apple's requirement.
Yeah, they're sweet about that. You have to run a bunch of online diagnostics and suck down an hour to prove that top case has a crack in it.
And they still, I love the fact that it feeds all this data right into their systems, but then our hardware techs still have to manually enter the same information.
Yeah, it's not without its charms. Indeed.
One other thing I just, oh, no, go
I
ahead.
just have a question. This might be very simple. When you're creating the Netboot set in the DeployStudio, it asks to give it a system name, and it also asks for the unique identifier. I've always wondered, what's the unique identifier for? What does it actually do?
To tell them apart if you have multiple Netboot sets online.
Yeah, I think it's sent as part of the.
Yeah, and the unique identifier also tells it whether or not you want to vote. Sorry.
The unique identifier also, if you set the number high enough, it also tells Netboot that this needs to be a load balanced image. So that's another reason for the unique identifier.
It's 4,000 something.
Yeah, it's 4,096 and up, I think.
I
always just set it to like
5,000
20,750 or something, and it works great.
Well, the new, again, with 1.7, or I'm sorry, I think it was either 130 or 131, when you create a Netboot set, it automatically sets the unique identifier to the OS you're creating the Netboot on. So if you're creating a Netboot set on 10.7.3, it sets the UID to 1073. So they've kind of, yeah, it's a new feature that they've put in.
Is that for new or feature?
Feature.
Not a bug, it's a favor.
I've got the answer to my prior question. Alistair was right on the money. rc.install contains the call to launch the runtime. My next session. Okay, so on to my actual question, and forgive me if this is a bunny trail, shoot it down if you want to. Is anyone net booting in a homogeneous environment with another product like Fog from Linux? We're hosting at one of our sites, hosting all of our net boot on a big ESX box. You're pixie booting and hosting the image on the same. You just hack.
No. That's a separate system. A separate system, but it's on the same networks, same subnets.
I'm talking about on the same box.
Ooh, no, that's weird.
I've done it on a Linux box. I have a
Yeah.
Linux server that Netboots Macs and
Mhm.
Pixie boots PCs at the same time.
You lose the filtration, the hardware model filtrations, and some of those features, it seems like.
Well, I'm one of the two guys here who doesn't use DeployStudio. So one of the things I wanted to know is there a Linux flavor? Because since Apple discontinued the X servers, I can't put a Mac Mini or a Mac Pro in a data center. I'll get shot by my clients.
And NBI just needs a NFS. I mean, you can host it. I have done that. Hosted.
You can host the data, but the DeployStudio.
The Netboot set, it's an NBI file, and as long as you modify your DHCP configuration and add boot P.
Yeah, well, I got that working. I have, like I said, I built an Ubuntu server, and it's simultaneously.
Oh, you're talking about the actual DeployStudio. I don't know.
Yeah, DeployStudio itself. I don't know the structure of DeployStudio. I don't know the layers of it. I understand I can host all the images stuff I can host on my Linux box.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, since Apple bailed from the enterprise market, is there a plan to at some point make DeployStudio available off the Apple platform? Because I will not put a Mac Mini. You know, I had a Dell server die.
I'm not that proud.
Well, I had a Dell server die in another state, and I was able to rebuild it from my office, and that's the benefit of a enterprise class hardware, which Apple doesn't make anymore.
Ubiquitous, a redundant array of independent servers.
I do that with two enterprise class servers.
And you work out something out of those robotic Legos that gets the power.
Right, yeah.
Lights up management.
Yes, I have super micro servers.
One thing that may help, there is no way of getting around hosting the actual DeployStudio software on a Mac. You can host the Netboot set somewhere else. If you have if you're running a VMware infrastructure or something else, because I think it should be fairly universal. Jamf Software does make a Netboot SUS appliance that will allow you to host a DeployStudio. Right now, it's just essentially you can host one Netboot set off of it, but it's a fully contained Ubuntu VM, and you can modify it to host a DeployStudio set. And right now, there's a limitation where setting up your helper IPs to point to that Netboot instance isn't currently working. Jamf's working on that. But if you need to host Netboot off of your VMware infrastructure, that's another way that you can at least host the Netboot set. For DeployStudio itself, at that point, if it ever comes down to it in my own environment that I have to junk my Xserve, my plan is going to be, I need a Mini, and I can host everything somewhere else. I can use Netatalk. I can use, the Netboot SUS. Just give me a Mini to run this on, and the rest I can handle.
Now, Intel just, I've seen a board recently. I think they call it AML. It's an Intel technology. It looks like someone at Intel said, "Oh my God, this IPMI, or what Apple calls NOM, is great. Let's make something identical with the same feature sets, yet completely incompatible." AMT. Okay. Well, if they put that on Mac Mini boards, then the Mini could become potentially a more acceptable server platform. But
There's the power strip. There's the ABC power strip. Oh, really? That you can remote in to do remote.
you can buy them.
There is actually a little thing about that. Just that, from what I saw, I remember seeing something on Twitter. I remember seeing DeployStudio just say at one point, very briefly, like they said, worst case, we'll open source it. People said, okay. That sounds like a pretty good worst case, but it's made by the Université de Lyon in France, and so there's probably all kinds of layers of administration over what they can and can't do and how they can spend their time or what they can release.
So I'm the other guy who's not using DeployStudio now. And up until the last iteration of Apple hardware, the last generation of the iMacs, we were able to do a full NetBoot, net restore using just ISC DHCP. And that does both NetBoot, net restore, and Pixie for all the installations of all our Linux boxes. Something happened, and the instructions for that are on the AFP site. If you follow them far enough, and there's a whole bunch of goo you drop in your DHCP file to identify the Macs and point everything wherever it happens to be. The last generations of the iMac hardware, something changed, and that doesn't work anymore. Yeah. Starting with I think the 11,1s. Yeah.
Yeah. 12.2, 12.3.
So they actually changed the boot flags to Explorer?
I haven't dug into it, but
Having issues even just with the EFI code itself.
Yeah, I've been having problems netbooting on some of the new Linux.
Brent?
I've gotten to the point to where, sometimes even netbooting, when I send the command out via ARD, I can't just bless the firmware. Something changed in the firmware. I don't know what it is, but I have to put this crazy long string of the exact path of the netboot image and everything in it. So I mean, there's definitely something going on in the firmware, but I don't know what it is.
I had one experience a couple weeks ago, which just confirms I had 25 Macs. I hit them all up at once. I had a lab which I could take. I have like I was saying, my DeployStudio setup is I have two images which are enabled. One is default, so that machines would by default boot the Lion set, and I think maybe 6 of my 25 iMacs I could hold in and they booted fine, and the others I couldn't. And what I did find would at least let me get them to work by selecting the disk at the startup or blessing it was by disabling that second image. There was no change to what was set as the default, but prior to when they were both on the Netboot server and they were both enabled, I would pick the startup disk. It didn't matter how I tried to do it; it would never be able to get past the bootloader. But as soon as I disabled the second image, which was just an old Core Duo legacy image, as soon as I disabled that, I could at least netboot it. I still had to do it by manually blessing or picking the startup disk. Option boot would still not show anything, but generally, like I saw this problem start to crop up more over the fall with I was asking around. I didn't see a lot of other people reporting it, but it seems like more and more people are having issues, but my attempts to sort of escalate it haven't gone very far. But maybe if enough people actually complain about it, then it might actually. I know I've seen them release some EFI related updates recently, but for me they've sort of half fixed the problem. But
that was going to be my question. Was of those of you who've seen issues in the past year, we took note of at least some of the iMac EFI updates causing or fixing the problem, depending on which update it was. Mm-hmm. We had machines that would netboot, and then you hit it with an EFI update and forget it. It was over. And we've actually had to go through attempting to downgrade the EFI, which is just a nightmare in its own regard. But I've also seen the opposite happen, where sometimes. So if you ever have some that you know have been working and then quit, check the EFI stuff first.
Interesting. Right back here.
Along with the same lines, we had the same issue sort of start to crop up with the iMacs and even with the Mac Pros as soon as we did an EFI update, or the MacBook Pros, sorry, and tried escalating it with Apple and didn't really get anywhere. And upgrading our server, I mean, luckily I'm in a position where we could do that, fixed it, and we haven't had any issues with any, so now that we're running a brand new server, running Lion, we haven't had any issues. So
that's actually a good question. Where'd he go? Oh, there he is. Are you running
sunk
a
into the floor.
Yeah. Are you running a 10.6.8 server with DeployStudio? Okay. So that's something that I've encountered before, and like you, I've luckily, well, I don't know if I want to say luckily, but I've upgraded to OS 10.7.3 server, and I've noticed that the newer Macs that I image have been less finicky, but on the flip side, now my older Macs are being more finicky. So it's almost as if not only do you need a 10.7.3 and a 10.6.8 Netboot set, but you also need a 10.6.8 server and a 10.7.3 server.
What kind of server did you get?
One of the things I just want to interject that I've been seeing, it seems to be more so if you're using like ISC's DHCP service, but basically a third-party service. If you have it specifying, like to hand out a certain netboot if it gets a certain identifier, model identifier coming in, that seems to be broken in the latest firmware. I think it started with the Mac Minis that shipped with Lion, that it stopped sending that identifier along. So what happens is it's not going to get your specified netboot set that you put in the list. It's just going to get the default, which more than likely is going to be some kind of Pixie set, which unless if you do some tricking isn't actually going to load because it needs legacy for that. So I think that's what a lot of people are running into, possibly. I don't know. It also sounds like there might be some issues with Apple's DHCP, which is also based off of ISC2. So especially if you're limiting by model identifier, that could possibly be the issue. So file bugs.
I actually have a kind of a side topic. Has anyone actually purchased or installed rack-mountable Mac Minis for servers? And are you, just out of curiosity, like what rack are you, like what company rack are you guys using? Sonnet. Same. Okay. Just 'cause we have the same thing coming up where I have the last Xserve they ever released, and we're on kind of a 4 to 5 year refresh cycle, so it's a plague that I'm going to have to start dealing with soon.
I have a question on that, not to get too far off topic. Has anyone gotten the rack minis? The Sonnet one that has the Thunderbolt on it? Has anyone seen that one? Is it out yet? Okay, never mind. Won't get too far off.
Yeah, I would. I'd love to hear some discussion or workflow experiences of people on the whole concept of backing up the user space during that DeployStudio, reimage. I deal with hundreds of staff members that we try to reimage in the summer. We had done the portable mobile accounts, sync back. We moved away from that, went to crash plan, so that was sort of that the sync and the backup for them, but no network account anymore.
Okay.
And it becomes very labor intensive in the summer when you're reimaging those machines. I got to back up your home, and then I got to image it, and I got to copy all your crap back, and so I've looked into the scripts. I've looked at some of the things. I'd like to hear some discussion and experiences with that.
We can certainly talk about that.
This is his little baby.
Excuse me? Yes, it is. We share in it. We all do. So DeployStudio's backup restore scripts. I had some grad students that had machines and were saving data on it. We told them not to save data on it, but we save data on it anyway. That's what happens. And I was kind of sick of asking and trying to waiting to hear back from people on whether or not I needed to back up their home folder. So what I decided to do was write a script to back up their home folder and their account. Now, the account is basically just a plist file, at least it was in 10.6. So far in 10.7, I think we're okay. That holds the information about that user, and then they have a password file, a hash file, that's also included on the system. And I'm going to stick on 10.6 right now because it's slightly broken on 10.7. But on 10.6, what these scripts will do, they're called backup restore. They'll look at your user directory. They'll back up every home folder that you have not told it to exclude to your DeployStudio repository, and then it'll look at each account. And it does a check to see if the account is a local account or a network account. And we do that with the authentication authority flag within the user's plist. If I recall correctly, authentication authority is only on network accounts, not on local accounts. So the script looks at that. It says if you're a local account, I want your plist. And it's just a copy of the plist. And I want your password file. And this is 10.6 again, very simple. Copy those two things back to your backup server. And the third thing it does is it checks the admins on that machine and says, is this user an admin? If it is, it writes it to a plist and says yes. And that's pretty much it. Once you've got your home folder, your user's plist, and the password file, whether or not they're admin, you just have to write that stuff back to the new system. And I basically use the create user package that comes with InstantImage that was originally written by, I forget. Yes, thank you. And I more or less, I know, sorry, A+. I basically copied what he had done to recreate that user. That's pretty much it. The restore process uses those same commands, DSCL commands, to write the user's data back into the system. And it works fairly well, I think. Is anybody else using it? Looking at it? Rich is my biggest tester, I think. Yeah. So,
just to give an idea of how well this works, I had a machine that I wanted to upgrade from 10.5 to 10.6. This was a shared library machine that had about 30-odd accounts on it. And my facility is one of those where you're going to find people unexpectedly storing incredibly important data in unexpected places. So I wasn't going to take any chances with this machine. So first I actually made a full backup of the machine. And then I re-imaged it using Rusty scripts. All 30 home folders went up. They were all AD network accounts, so didn't worry about pulling up any other user data besides whether or not they were an admin. Went up, re-imaged, went back down. People logged in the next day. Nobody said a word, except one lady who said, "Where'd OmniGraffle go?" She had installed OmniGraffle. I had no idea. Fortunately, I still had that full backup, and I was able to pull from that. But nobody else said a word. To this day, no one has said a word. This is a good tool.
That's excellent. Yes, so I should mention, thanks, Rich, for pointing out the difference between local accounts and network accounts. We don't back up the user data for network accounts because that lives on your network server. We don't care about that data. It gets recreated at login. So the only thing we back up for network accounts is whether or not that user should be admin.
So if you're, how about in a mobile account that, so they're an AD or they're an OD account, but it's creating that locally, but there is no network home that exists.
Yeah, so exactly. So it can be a mobile account from AD, OD, LDAP, whatever you want. The user record, that authorization that user is allowed to log into that machine is stored elsewhere. So we don't need to back it up. The only thing we look at for those mobile accounts is that home folder and whether or not they're admins.
So, but it's still backing up their home folder.
Yes, exactly. It backs, regardless of what type of user it is, it backs it up. Yeah, yeah. So when it gets restored then, and you boot the machine, it does its binding, the person logs in, that account is, the account data is not there, but the home folder is, and the OS says, oh, it's already there. I don't have to recreate it. And it just gives rights to it. And that's it. So it's a lot of magic on Apple's side. Thankfully, it works. 10.6 right now, I'm sorry, 10.7 right now, the authorization authority is apparently not working. I've heard one person tell me it's not working. So everything's being backed up like local accounts. But we'll look into that and see if we can get it fixed.
On a similar topic, has anyone here gone from Reimaging machine, taking a machine that has a local admin account and then reimaging it and then authenticating with AD or some kind of authentication service? My question is, excuse me again. We're currently doing the same thing. None of our Macs are currently managed on the faculty side of things, so that was kind of the project that we're working on up till now. So my question is, how are you backing up their home directory and then migrating it to the new AD account when they log in with that account instead?
Quick question. Where can we get your scripts?
Sure. Sorry, rusty.isa-geek.org. That'll take it to my blog with the scripts. They're also on GitHub. Yes.
You may want to treat this as a two-part process where migrate the account first.
That's just not going to work.
Then do the move. I have a script which is up on my GitHub repository, which, by the way, anyone can have access to. It's github.com/rtroughton. Thank you, Rusty. but in my case, it's an interactive script where it was originally written by Patrick Gallagher at Emory University, and it works really well. Basically, it looks at who has a local account on your machine, and it'll help you migrate it to its AD equivalent. It'll change all the permissions. It'll fix, admin rights. It does a lot. So it's the kind of thing that you can hand off to your tech and say, I need you to migrate this account, this account, this account, not this account, this account, this account, and it'll work just fine. Because it's basically, first thing it'll do is it'll pop up a list of the accounts and say, which ones do you want to move? And then you just move them one at a time. So you may just want to break that up as a two-parter. But hello? Oh, good, this still works.
Just keep moving, it's okay.
But yet audio still works. Amazing.
I didn't do it. I'm pushing the on button.
Okay, got it.
Power's back. Apparently there's just too much power here.
Okay, we're fine.
Yeah, so on moving to AD accounts, I mean, the basic, I have a script also, and it's basically renaming the home folder and then doing a chown command, yeah.
That's the current way
and
that we're
matching
doing it, is migrating and choning. And
yeah.
We've been looking at doing scripts, but I just figured I'd wait until we can hear and get other people's input.
Yeah.
So, all right. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
So when you're doing the migration, if they have usernames that are different, then their local account is one, but their AD account, and you're trying to migrate them over. So how do you do that piece?
Good question.
That's what I'm facing, is the usernames are different, because right now they're like their full name is their local account, and then
Their AD would be something else. Or,
Actually, with my script, that doesn't matter.
okay.
Because what it'll do is say your name is Joe Schmo and your AD account is Bob Smith. What you would do is you'd select Joe Schmo from the list. It'll then ask you, what's the AD account you want to move it to? You put in Bob Smith, it'll rename the home folder to match, and it'll assign the correct permissions.
So my question
Like
is,
I said, I didn't originally write this one. Patrick Gallagher, brilliant man.
okay. I guess my question is in that process, does the user do you have to do the migration before the user logs in, or do they have to log in first before you should copy over from the backup?
No, they don't have to be logged in.
Okay.
They don't have to log in, and in fact, I ran into an issue where the user account, in restoring the user accounts that were backing up with my scripts, the account had to exist before I gave it admin rights, I believe. So we used the create mobile account command. You can use that once you're booted and bound to your system, to your LDAP or AD or OD, and it'll create the account without asking for a user password. So it creates the account, but it doesn't enter the passwords. When the user actually then does log in, it completes creating that account.
What we found is that in converting users to AD was not so much username issues, but user ID issues, which is going from 501 to whatever 8-digit number they acquire. You had to be careful to make sure that people's time machine backups were not wiped out, because suddenly every single file they owned was now owned by a different user. Once you change their real files in their home folder, then if you're not careful, if the amount of space that their files consume in their home folder takes up more space than what remains available on the Time Machine drive, then Time Machine will basically Pac-Man its way out from the back end, trying to clear enough space to make a brand new backup, even though things have changed. And to get around that, because of Apple's tight ACLs, we found that we had to go into 10.5 systems. There was a file system ACL control command, which was deprecated and gone in 10.6 and 10.7, but you can at least take that command and move it to a 10.6 machine and then run it from there, and there's various other black magic that you have to do, but it's a mess. So the user name actually we found was the least of our problems.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, that's the issue that we're experiencing now. Management wants all the machines to be bound to the domain, which is great, but unfortunately we have over 400 machines that have local accounts. And we had issues prior to 10.68 where if something happened on AD, the user couldn't log into the machine at all. So, I wasn't even thinking about, bringing this up. So the question is, how do I
do this migration so that, you know, like he mentioned, I didn't even think about the time machine backups.
Yeah.
There's some users that have time machine backups. There's some users that don't. But here's another issue I didn't even think about. On our network drive, compared to the actual the hard drive on the Mac, it's smaller. So let's say for the network drive, the user's already used up, you know, a good 90% of their space. And I try to migrate their profile that was locally, you know, how...
Well, just one thing I want to mention is we had the same issue at first about AD, if you're not on campus or VPN or whatever, that you couldn't log in. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we just do mobile accounts, which allows you to store like a cache of your password, so you can still log in without network access. So that's what we do. Is even in DeployStudio, there's a little box to enable mobile accounts upon account creation and stuff like that.
That's local MCX, right?
No.
That's just caching credentials.
Caching credentials for that. That's the defined process.
Right.
Yeah, but you can use it. You can use MCX to set that as the default for every network account that logs in. Make them a mobile account. Yeah.
Yeah. All DeployStudio is doing is using one of the DS command line tools to.
Using DS to bind the machine.
Yeah.
Right.
DS config AD.
Yeah. DS config AD.
I've seen issues though where we bound Macs to AD with mobile accounts, and they were able to resolve from outside our network our AD authentication server because the DNS was external, and that caused them to fail or 2-minute timeout or something before they use the cached local credentials. So, political battles.
Real quick, is there anything else that people want to talk about specific to DeployStudio? We kind of went off on a tangent here, so.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, you have a microphone, so go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to know, since this is my first time really dealing with DeployStudio, and the current version we're running is 127C, and it's supposed to be upgraded to the newer one. My concern is, how do I safely, you know, back up, just in case I install the new one and now something is broken? You know, how do I revert back?
I actually created a really quick script that just throws the entire repository into a DMG. So that's all it does, is it literally pulls all the files and compresses it into a DMG and throws it into a backup folder for me. And as far as DeployStudio goes, you know, it's just with those couple of apps that they have in there, and all you have to do is, you know, hold on to the installer for 127 or whatever. Does anyone know if they archive the installers on DeployStudio?
They do, but I heard 124 was broken. It's like the archived one. But it's kind of hard to get to because I think you have to write in the URL.
Yeah, you have to do it
exact
manually.
version. Yeah.
So that's what I do is every time there's an update, even the nightly builds, I'm kind of on edge. I have 2 servers, a testing and a production. So testing is always on the nightly. And before I do the production upgrade, I run this script. It pulls in the masters and everything like that. So I mean, my DMG comes out to be like 125 gigs, and it takes a little while. And I can throw this up on my GitHub, and you can grab it off of there. But it's very simple. It's basically a ditto on the entire repository into a DMG.
You can also skip the masters. Like if you have your images backed up somewhere else, you click the backup.
Yeah.
The workflows and computers.
Yeah.
So are you familiar with the way DeployStudio sets up the repository? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I do the same. I have 2 scripts. One does the masters so that I can migrate, and one skips the entire folder. So.
One other thing you can do is actually separate your repository from your boot drive. Like in my case,
my server has the SSD boot drive option, which doesn't have a lot of room, and then I have my RAID 5, and that's actually on the RAID 5 is where I actually stick my repository. So anytime before an upgrade, what I do is I back up the boot drive, and then do the upgrade. But I know that no matter what, I haven't touched my actual repository. Yeah. And your repository can actually live on a completely separate server. You know, it doesn't have to be on the same box as DeployStudio. So, one other thing to think about.
The other thing I would suggest is backing up the Netboot sets that you're using with RC127, just in case DeployStudio tries to update themselves.
Yeah.
Back here, and
yeah, I was wondering if. Okay, I was wondering if anybody has any experience running the DeployStudio replicas, because we have one DeployStudio server that works for us just fine, no issues. We have we have another office that doesn't really have desktop support, and we'd like to automate their processes as much as possible. So we're looking to set up with a replica, but there really isn't a ton of information or documentation about it. So if anybody has any experience with that.
Anybody else that definitely is using it in production?
I tested it for a little while, and pretty much all I know about it is in the background it's doing an Rsync between the two servers.
Right.
But the problem I was having is it only did it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And our network just got a huge upgrade with the backbone and everything, so we've just gone to a simple unicast server now. But
If you know at Chilcote, Joseph Chilcote at Adobe, he's definitely using it extensively. He does not have a immediate, like, I need to sync this immediately type need. But when you have a good backbone between sites, I mean, you can do it somewhat manually, or you can possibly look at what script it's using. One of the nice things about DeployStudio is they're like us, you know? They're admins that hacked some stuff together. So you can kind of look under the covers with a lot of the actual mechanisms they're using to accomplish the tasks, to accomplish the binding script, to do the turning off of the, hey, don't you want to go use iCloud type notifications. So you can look at that exact shell script, and it's part of the installer, whether or not you want on the admin system to do that type of synchronization between locations.
It's Etsy periodic daily.
I think it's actually a launch daemon.
The Rsync?
The Rsync.
They might have changed it. They might have updated it.
I don't know. Not 100% sure.
Also in the preference pane on your replica, there's just a button you can click to force a replication.
Yep. So did you have any other specific concerns?
I mean, it's just sort of the general setup. I mean, it seems pretty simple.
Yeah.
The assistance to set up the replica, and boom, it works. Or is there any like a massaging that has to happen for that?
RC 124 to RC 130, I would say boom, it works. RC 131.
That's with replicas. I had it set up at one point. Main Xserve was the master, had a little iMac that I set up as replica just so we had it available. And I actually chose the option of just replicating the database.
Yeah.
And I really just used it for backup purposes. This way, if something got hosted on the master, I still had the replica with everything on it. I didn't actually contact it. But you can do that, but one of the things you have to be careful about is in your Netboot set where it contacts for the repository. So I do believe if you set it up correctly, I think it's fairly simple that you just go through and it'll split depending on which server you talk to. But
You also want to be concerned about which server you do the update to a computer record on. Try to remember from 2 years ago, was it? Or 2011. Brandon and I did a presentation on it.
I guess last year at this point.
It was January last year. And I believe if you made a change on the replica,
it doesn't go back up.
It doesn't go back up.
Yeah, because that was actually one of the problems that people had with a tiered setup. Like you had a master site with the master,
Right.
and then you had multiple. Like say if you're K-12 and you have your admin center with the master, and then like say 5 different schools, you have one master at each of those. If you update the record to the replica, it's going to get blown away at the next sync. I believe it will update, but it'll get blown away when the master then pushes it out. So you actually, if you need to make updates, you want to talk to the master first.
There were some updates there where it started syncing. I can't remember exactly the scenario. There's a PDF of our presentation. I can get you a link to that.
There's YMMV, right? There's your knowledge mode area. There's also trust that's verified. Let's not worry about whether or not it's different between versions.
It's verified. Good point.
This is more just curious what tools people are using to back up their DeployStudio server, and those instances where you want a one-off backup of machine before you wipe it out and deploy image to it.
To address your second one, backing up a machine before you blow it away, DeployStudio is actually a fantastic backup tool for this purpose. And it's really simple to make it work. You just use the create a master workflow. I actually have 2 workflows set up for anytime I work on a machine, like do major work on it, first thing I do, N key, pull a backup. And in the event I screw up, which fortunately is rare.
You get decent performance out of that?
Yeah, I do with my network and my server and everything else. So it's one of those things where your mileage is going to vary. But I basically have two workflows set up. One is called create system backup, and the other one is restore system from backup. And all it does is the first one is create master from volume, and the other one is restore image to machine. And I think the only thing I had to do with restoring the image back down was I had to make sure to check off the option to skip the system, the setup assistant. Because for a few versions of Deploy Studio, I was finding that it was going into the setup assistant, even though the machine was fine and fully set up. But I mean, I've been doing that for about 2 years now. It has worked fine every time, unless, of course, the drive has some problem that would cause a backup problem anyway. And even then, sometimes it still works, which has saved my bacon at least twice.
Backups for Deploy Studio Server, we're using our centralized backup server called TSM, Deploy Endpoint Manager, or Deploy Storage Manager, sorry. Does a full system backup, backs up the Deploy Studio repository.
Like, let's say you want to do a backup, but you want the backup to be in, I guess, a different file share because you want to keep your master images separate from those backups you're creating for user computers. So is there a way to separate those images? Because I was thinking of doing something like that, but I just don't want the master images to be mixed up with user images.
When you create that image, can you set a permissions on it? Or is that after?
Yeah, well, there's Deploy Studio permissions you can set on it, yeah.
Do you do that during the creation process?
Yeah.
Because my thought is if while you're creating that image, if you set it into a backups set, then when you actually go to restore the image, the technicians will only see the technician images, masters.
Well, it's not even an issue of that so much as I'm running out of storage space.
Yeah.
So I want to really put them on a server that's specific just for backups where I know, hey, we keep the backups and we clear those out every 2 weeks or so.
I think it depends on what you're using to back up. Because at least in my situation, I'm also using TSM. And on the master server, I actually exclude the masters folder.
Yeah.
So it backs up Deploy Studio and all my machines and preferences, but it doesn't back up the masters. Because in all honesty, if the server goes down, that's going to be the least of my problems. So.
But were you talking about pulling a system image?
I'm talking, the system image, and
right.
But for specific users, I don't want to keep those on the same server as the Deploy Studio.
You said folder actions. I heard folder actions somewhere. Maybe.
It seems a bit MacGyver, but it could work.
And then, I was going to say with folder actions, what you could do is just for this particular system backup, name it a certain name, and then just have the folder action set for look for this name. Like in my case, when I'm making system backups, I do ticket number _ machine name, and then use the rest of the default Deploy Studio name. And that for me is specific enough that if I need to restore, generally all I need to do is just start typing in ticket, and it'll show me the list of backed up machines that I have. But I definitely hear where you're coming from with losing storage space, because I've backed up machines that wound up with like a 500 gig image, and I'm just going, ooh.
Yeah.
I better get that off soon.
Does your Deploy Studio runtime auto log in?
Yes.
Okay.
But I mean, I can change that. In fact, I'm thinking of changing that.
This doesn't sound like a good idea, but I'm going to say it anyway. What if you run? However, what if you run 2 Deploy Studio admin servers, and you have one Netboot set and 2 separate repositories? You would log into the different Deploy Studio servers for your different repositories. You can't share workflows. It's not Replica.
Right.
I was just thinking the same thing.
But you could, yeah. But if you replicate but don't replicate masters, then you could replicate your database, your workflows, and then one you would log into for backups, one you would log into for production. But then you're running 2 Deploy Studio admin servers, and.
But I don't even know if you need to run a whole nother Deploy Studio admin, because I know all it is it's an AFP share, so you might just be able to create 2 AFP shares, have one Netboot point to one, and one Netboot point to the other. You might not necessarily have to run an entire.
But the Netboot, you point to the Netboot during the Netboot. I'm sorry, you point to the repository during the Netboot creation or during the server setup? Both?
Server setup, right. No, yeah, you're right.
It's during.
You'd have to run Deploy Studio Admin on two
You can
machines.
dynamically detect it by the trigger. It's the only other way of
Yeah.
Yeah.
repo selection.
Magic solution, put it in the cloud.
Yeah, just put it in Mac.com or MobileMe or one of those. It'll stick around.
When you're creating a, I guess I should address this to you. When you're creating a master, and if it's a backup and you prefix it with, say, the word backup, I don't believe it drops it into the HFS masters folder until it's done capturing. Is that?
Yeah.
Well, it goes first to a temp folder.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So as soon you could have some sort of watcher script looking at the HFS repo, and if it is a DMG that begins with backup, it could just kind of add a dot to the beginning of the name, so that way the other people who log in wouldn't be able to see the backup. I don't know if that would be a quick and dirty way to achieve the goal, but it's one way to skin the cat, maybe.
It would hide the images. It would also hide the images from you when you're trying to figure out what's large.
Yeah,
that
you'd have to
getting
pop
backed
into
up.
this to the server itself to restore,
Yeah.
but hopefully you don't have to restore all the time. I would
Right.
think that it's just something that you'd have to do occasionally.
Right. I mean, it's just a cover my ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I started my system for precisely that reason.
That's why we wear pants.
Yes. And suspenders and belts, whatever possible.
That's right, sir.
I have another question.
Go for it.
This is more in regards to, I guess, running multiple operating systems. So I was doing some testing, and it's very inconsistent when you try to add a third partition on a computer that has already two partitions, because if you try... Is that the timer? Thank you. If you try to, I guess, try to split the first partition, it might work fine, but if you split the second partition to create that other partition, it seems to be finicky. It might not boot, it might boot, and it's just very inconsistent. I don't know how many people have dealt with multi-boot, you know.
There it is.
Any OS. I mean, I could have like a line partition, a snow leopard partition, and then let's say I want to have a Windows partition. If I choose the first partition to split, it might run boot camp fine. If I use the second partition to split, it might not even detect it. The workflow will just error out.
GPG formatted dollar. And you're not taking into account the restore partition to the line, the recovery partition. That's another thing that it's semi-irresponsible for people to say, oh, there's a deploy line on this, let me just move your partitions around. Well, if you have boot camp, you need to keep track of where that partition is.
Well, I was looking also in this utility, but I noticed that sometimes it adds it to boot camp might be this 0 S1 S5 or something like that, depending on how it repartitions. But it's very weird how it handles that. Sometimes it might skip a number, and I know sometimes it moves around the recovery partition. But
No, I've seen that. In our university, we have an automated installer that we put in line systems as part of that.
As part of that, it will actually relabel where the restore partition is on Lion systems. So instead of being 3, it'll now call it 5, and it'll just skip 3. And I think that's something internal that's going on when it's restructuring. It's not really moving the data, it's just relabeling what it's called. But yeah, I'll wind up with a system with 1, 2, 4, and 5, and it'll skip 3. But I haven't had it have issues like you're saying, though, with not wanting to boot to a particular one or access that data.
There's a lot of Windows restrictions on your partitions, which is what you have to deal with in the environment, especially if you're using XP, which is even worse.
Yeah, the MBR is going to limit you down to it can't be any higher than 4.
okay, all right, that's good to know.
The only thing that I've noticed, because we use we dual boot with Windows and Mac, that the image that I created for Windows, if I did it on a machine where the hard drive was larger, and I'm putting it on a Mac where the hard drive is smaller, I have to play with the actual size of it, or it will error out. And when I look at the log, it'll say this long number, and it'll say the size. And then I have to play around with the numbers to say, okay, for Windows gets 60% and Mac gets 40%. But I haven't done the triple boot. That's one of my ultimate goals.
I have a quick question about that. Is anyone using WinClone? I'd be interested to hear experiences with WinClone, because that might help your little issue with the sizing.
So we could plug that presentation then?
Yeah, I'll put in that presentation. Tomorrow, 9:15 a.m., room 108, I think. At our university, we have an automated installer that does boot camp installations. We can just let users go to a website, click a link, boom. It'll start downloading and installing Windows. And the piggyback of that is built into the installer on the back end's WinClone command scripts. You do have to have, talking about different system sizes, WinClone has the ability for the Windows image to shrink that partition down. So you have to have it prepared properly. If you don't, or haven't shrink the partition beforehand, then that's not going to work. You're going to end up with really bizarre results from that, if it'll even boot. But if you shrink it properly, then it can go down to, I think, just a little above that size. And that allows us the option for our users to pick anything from 30 gigs up to 500 gigs for a Windows partition. And it'll fluff to fill it. Windows has to do a check disk. It basically just tags it and flags it to do a check disk that something changed and it doesn't like it. And it'll scan it, but everything will work out fine. But yeah, we've done over 10,000 WinClone deployments easily in the past several years through this installer. And it works most of the time.
That is Thursday at 9:15 in room 108. Also, there is a Netboot Fundamentals and Customization in room 106 at the same time.
I'm sorry, I just had a real quick question. I work in K-12 and we have a one-to-one, so we have to image about 2,000 MacBooks every year. So we got DeployStudio working really well, and we're very happy with it, but we're always looking for optimizations. For example, rather than run a standard workflow with a bunch of packages like CS5 and stuff, it takes a long time. We found it's better to run a workflow and then re-image it up as a monolithic image and push it down so it can do a block copy, so everything happens a lot faster. I was wondering if anyone else has come up with optimizations like that that could kind of speed up the imaging process.
So, yeah, my input on that is we're doing I have an automated script for InstaDMG. So it shoves Office and a couple other small apps in there. My goal from this conference personally is I've been meaning to get into doing Monkey myself, but currently the way we're doing the faculty deployments is actually all of what we call our base software, which is Flash, Reader, et cetera, et cetera. That all gets done through DeployStudio, and then InstaDMG throws Office and all the updates that come in with the vanilla catalog and stuff like that. So that's what we're currently doing is we block level copy Microsoft Office and a couple other apps into the base image, and then use DeployStudio to push the packages that update almost every other week.
What I've done in the past is have as part of my base image a hidden directory at the root of the hard drive, readable only by root, that has a script in it that will install the Adobe CS package, so that then afterwards, so it's on everyone's computer, but it's not installed, it's not serialized. If someone needs it, a simple push with ARD to run the script, installs it, 5 minutes later it's done. That works really well.
I don't want to bury the lead on my afternoon, I don't want to let all the tricks out of the bag, but it's really a balance between what matters most in your deployment. You got a stuff load of clients that you just want to block level copy once and be done with it. You're not worried about a lot of network traffic or something like that. You can fight with packages. You can repackage installers so that it works within InstaDMG, or you can make your life easy and not worry about the extra overhead and lengthening of each individual client's prepare time by using thin imaging, by using Monkey, by using other patch management systems to, after as much as you wanted to fight with, got into that image and got deployed on the machines, and DeployStudio like said, okay, I'm done. Maybe Monkey wakes up and does all the rest of the stuff and brings it 100% up to date. But having patch management systems in the first place means that why not just use that for the entire post-imaging, suite. I do nothing in DeployStudio in the way of packages. I don't worry about any other packages. It's just like these very few purposes, and I know that I want to rely when things are out in the field on Monkey to keep them up to date, to keep them patched, to do a whole bunch of stuff that you can level up with Monkey on Friday at 1.
Correct.
That's like
There's 10:45. Monkey around is at 9:15 and 109. Level up with Monkey is room 106 at 10:45.
I believe there's one on Thursday too, isn't there? Thursday afternoon for Monkey. Yeah, there's monkeys everywhere.
It's the topic this year.
Oh, there's a session of overall deployment that includes Monkey in it. I don't know who mentioned that over here on Thursday. I forget the name of it though.
At the risk of jumping back on a track, is there anybody here that's using DeployStudio for deploying Windows partitions? And can we talk about people's experience and best practices and things to avoid, and maybe the overall story is avoid it like the plague, or maybe it's the best way to do it? I don't know. Just would like some more information on that.
Mine was pertaining to the current topic, actually. I'm sorry? Okay. Well, one of the questions I had, I think Alistair kind of knows what I'm talking about. I've used InstantImage for a variety of purposes in terms of functionality, deploying very modular builds, currently deploying a Jamf Composer compiled configuration that's basically a monolithic image. And what I'd like to move toward is deploying a sort of minimum configuration with maybe a monkey bit, and that's it. And having some sort of system take over once it's got the minimum image on the system. I don't know if several of you have different experiences using different tools such as Monkey or Casper or Puppet to take care of the second stage of imaging once the system is alive. But if so, I'd be interested to hear what the sort of perfect combination of the different tools that are out there is, and ways to still use the capabilities of DeployStudio, but rely on some other patch management solution. What your experiences have been in terms of what's the fastest, what's the leanest, and those sorts of things.
That's a great question. I'm going to ask you to move it to a different session.
Okay.
Sorry. Thursday morning, there's evolving macOS 10 deployments to meet the modern educational mission. I believe that's the one that they talk about Monkey, Puppet, DeployStudio, the combination of the two. Nate Walk and Alistair, you talking about, you're not talking about DeployStudio at all, are you? No. Just straight Monkey? They're just talking straight Monkey. Ryan Coleman is here from Puppet. He's doing Puppet sessions. Okay. I think there's no panacea. I think it depends on your environment. That's the short answer. But I'd like to get to a little bit of the dual boot. We've only got about 5 minutes left. So does anyone want to talk about dual boot?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rich.
In our environment, we have visiting scientists who come in, and so for them, we have iMacs that are set up dual boot, Windows, XP, and currently it's 10.7, so that they have a choice as what they want to work with. And the way my deployment is set up is that the Windows partition goes down first. I'm not running anything special on that because there's no special after action in DeployStudio for that. It's basically put down the image. Then after that, it's put down the line image and the recovery partition, and then there's a string of packages and the AD binding and everything else. And the reason I do it that way is that once the Windows partition is down, I'm imaging the Mac side, and I can tell all the steps after that. The first step after that is basically target the last thing imaged, and then after that, it's all previous target, previous, so I can just inherit all the way down the line. So that's, for me, it's worked out very successfully. And like I said, the main thing I did was I just made sure that the Windows partition went first, just to make sure that all the other after actions were applying to the Mac side only. Yes. I captured it a while ago, so it's not using the new disk image format. It was using the NTFS gzipped image, gzip file. It still works just fine. It's what I think we first captured it a year and a half ago. It still works.
Great. Over here, thoughts?
What we do as far as the dual boot, we use Boot Camp, and we just upload the image to DeployStudio, and we have it set that Windows goes first. And usually, depending, how the network is, for the dual boot image, it takes roughly about 15 minutes.
So bad.
My question was just if you're dual booting, are you binding both sides or just the Mac side?
Actually, we're just binding the Mac side.
In my case, I'm binding the Mac side, basically all Windows-specific actions I need to do after it boots for the first time. So it's, my administrator account is there in the image. I've sysprepped it, but then I need to go and AD bind it.
You can bind both. You don't necessarily do it in the image.
I'm not doing it as part of the DeployStudio process, but I am binding both sides with separate names. Separate names is important.
Yeah, separate name. I cheat and just on the Mac side, because of our Kerberos on the Windows side and some of the things we have going on with our network, the Windows side wins. So Windows matches DNS, hostname for hostname. But on the Mac side, because they care less about our Macs, I add -Mac to the end of it. So I have, for each computer, they're dual bound like that to AD.
The other thing to note with Windows images is if you're making one and you're putting it up, do a very, very light sysprep. You don't need to do anything, but DeployStudio will go through, as long as you put the name in the database, it will use that sysprep to rename it. Otherwise, it doesn't touch it afterwards. And you have to go around it.
So show of hands, who's doing dual booting? Okay, keep them up. Everybody see who's got their hands up? If they're next to you, you got any questions about it? Find them. We've got about a minute left. So any real quick thoughts?
Just one last thing, a quick tip I have about dual booting is I put the image on the computer with Windows, put it in audit mode, and then I immediately take a Windows or a DeployStudio image of it, so that's like the base of a base Windows install. And then I also do I install all the Boot Camp drivers and a couple other little things and take a second image of it, and then I take a third image of it after it's sysprepped. The only tip I have there with those three images is it just makes it easier rather than having to install Windows from scratch and putting everything back on there. If you have the extra disk space, it's only about 5 gigs on your repository. So audit mode, pre-sysprep, and then actual sysprep.
Great. Yeah.
Anyone here have any experience catch me after about using the new freeze home directory scripts?
Freeze home directory scripts. I looked at them when they first came out. Basically, it looked like it froze, like it recreated the home directory every time you logged in.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
It's lazy, and I have a lot of machines that are kiosks.
Yeah, easy to do.
Yeah, I just wondered if anybody here's actually deployed them. Have you've looked at them?
Deployed?
Can I catch you afterwards? Or?
Well, I did that like 5 years ago, and you probably wasn't using it. Just that still would work on logout. It would erase the disk user.
And that's all it is. I haven't even unwrapped the package. I just went to look and do that.
Just want to add a copy of that entire user folder in a directory with only root access, and a logout selector to log out as a project every time you log in.
Yep.
That's probably what, assuming that's what DeployStudio is doing.
Yep, that's pretty much it. Cool. So I want to thank Nathan, thank you Brandon, thank you Frank in the booth, thank you everyone for coming, I really appreciate it.